Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? We still have a couple of more minutes. Thank you for joining. We'll do a introduction to test-driven development, and we'll use Swift data also a little bit. All right. So let's see over here. All right. If you can hear me, go ahead and type something in the comment. Where are you from? And where did you hear about this live stream? That will always help. So in the YouTube chat, you can ask questions if you want. We'll be beginning in a couple of minutes, 2, 3 minutes. Meanwhile, you can go and write in the chat, where are you from? Where are you logging in? I mean, where are you from, basically? Which region, which part of the world? It's always fun to know where everybody is joining from. All right. Scott from KY, okay. All right. Whenever I run these streams, it always gives me a message that the stream current bitrate is lower. Well, that's all I have over here in Houston. Right. Will from Ontario, Canada. And it says email. Oh, probably you're registered at Azam School, so maybe you got an email. Okay, got it. Akshay from India. Artem from Russia. Okay, wow. Netherlands. My wife is actually from Netherlands. I have never visited Netherlands. I really need to visit Netherlands. But I will be going to Swift Craft, which is in UK. And then sometime in October, I'll go to Portugal, but not Netherlands. Maybe one day I'll go to Netherlands. All right, new people joining in. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the YouTube chat. We'll be starting shortly. Ooh. Darshan from United States. I'm also from United States. I'm from Houston, Texas. Atta Khan from Pakistan. Where from Pakistan, Atta? Which part of Pakistan or which city? Portland, Oregon. Beautiful Portland. Portland is really beautiful. All right. All right, everyone. I think we should probably get started now. First of all, thank you so much for everyone for joining. A little bit of my introduction. My name is Mohammad Azam. I go by Azam. If you do have any questions, you can always type in the YouTube chat. And I have been programming for quite a long time. Started with 2010 for iOS development, but before that, I was a very I was doing a .NET development, and I am a speaker. I run my own website, which is Azam Sharp School. Probably you have already seen this or heard about it. This is where I post all of my courses. And if you look at the range of the courses, I have like a lot of courses that I offer. One of the workshop that is going to be next week is on Introduction to Testing in iOS. And this is close to like a 3 hour workshop. So what you're looking at right now, the live stream, this is really a small part of the bigger workshop. All right. And these are the last time I'm going to offer the workshop for $50. it doesn't really make sense to have workshop for $50. It doesn't make sense. And courses, you can definitely go to azamsharp.school. You can get access to everything using monthly or annual. And one of the great things about these membership plans is that you get all the courses, you get 130 hour, you get 50% of workshops and monthly Q&A, which is really good, only for members. All right, so thank you so much again for joining, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So this workshop is about introduction to test-driven development. All right. I've already gone through my introduction. So Mohammad Azam, coding bootcamp instructor, author, speaker. And I'm going to go through a couple of these slides, but then I'm going to go and we'll implement some features using Swift and also Swift data. And we're going to write some tests. So there won't really be any UI or user interface. It will be mostly, we'll be writing a test, all right? So what's the definition of test-driven development? Well, test-driven development simply means that you write your test before any line of production code, or you write a failing test before any line of production code. And usually the cycle of test-driven development is also known as red-green refactor. By the way, if you do have any questions, you can ask in the YouTube chat, all right? So red-green refactor simply means that you start by writing your test, so your step over here, and your test is going to fail because, well, you haven't really written the code associated with the test, that the test is testing. That code doesn't even exist. And then you will write just enough code to make sure that your test actually passes. So that will be the green. After that, you go to the refactoring. Refactoring means that you're improving the code without changing the behavior. And that's the most important part. Refactoring does not mean that you will be adding more tests. Refactoring does not mean that you will be changing the behavior. If the behavior was that if you apply a coupon on a shopping cart, it will give you 20% discount, well, that behavior should still work after refactoring. So the behavior does not change during refactoring. All right. The question is, workshop is $50, 1 month is $25 plus 50% discount for the workshop. So members for 1 month plus workshop better than just one workshop. Yeah, you can buy the workshop. Well, yeah, you get a 50% discount, so you get $25 for the members. Yeah, so the discount is for the members only. When you sign up for a member, you get a discount code. All right, but keep in mind that these workshops, they're not going to be offered for $50 anymore. If you go to the workshops page, you can find out that the workshops will be like $140, $120, or even more. $50 just doesn't make sense to offer. It's just a lot of work to put these workshops, as you can imagine, like 3 hours are just the workshops and then weeks in preparation. All right, so you can definitely check it out, whichever one plan suits you. All right, so we covered the red-green refactor. There are many different kinds of tests that are available. All right, the testing pyramid over here, you can see that you have unit tests. You have basically more unit tests, and then you have some integration test, and then you have end-to-end test. And it also goes in that speed, that particular order. Like if I start with 1 and 2 and 3, unit tests are usually much faster, right? Because they are just testing a very small portion of your app. They're not testing a lot of stuff. Integration test integrates with different services or different modules that you have. And end-to-end tests are the slowest one, but the reason that they're slowest one is because they are testing a lot of stuff. So End-to-end tests are one of the best tests that you can use against bugs, against regression. So even if you don't have integration test or you don't have unit tests, make sure that you're always writing end-to-end tests, because end-to-end test will definitely show you that how the user is going to interact with your application. Now, I'm not saying that unit tests and integration tests are not important. I'm saying that make sure that you have end-to-end test also. A lot of bugs are not caught because we never wrote end-to-end test. All right. Okay. Now, you may have different benefits of TDD, but I've been doing TDD for some time now. And what I've found for TDD are these couple of benefits. At least that's my opinion, and that's what I have found. Now, if you have been doing TDD, you may have found different benefits. All right, and that's perfectly fine. So my benefits that I've found is TDD, it definitely helps you to understand a complicated domain. What does that even mean, like complicated domain? Complicated domain means that if I'm going to work for a company, let's say a medical company or a hospital or a finance company, and I don't know the domain, I don't know what this transaction means or how the hospital system works. I mean, I'm a developer, I need to understand the domain. So in order to understand the domain, TDD or test-driven development can definitely help. Test whether they are written using TDD techniques or not using TDD techniques. They all give you confidence so that you can make changes for the future. So if you make some changes and they're gonna break, well, hopefully your tests are gonna catch it. Another thing that I've noticed with using the TDD approach is it definitely helps you to solve algorithm related questions. Again, this goes back to the complexity for the domain. All right. So the more complicated your domain is, like if you are working with like insurance management or some financial stuff, a domain that you're just not familiar with, then TDD is definitely going to help you with those things. Now, here are a couple of notes that I have written about testing or unit testing in general. Make sure to test the domain. This is kind of like a previous slide. You have to make sure that you test the domain. Domain means where all the business rule lives. All right. This is where all the logic portions of your code is. Like what happens when you apply a 20% discount to a shopping cart that already has a AAA discount applied? Well, that's logic. That's the domain. Like what's going to happen, right? So usually developers are not really good at understanding the domain. You have to go, I mean, developers are really good in developing, but mostly developers, they don't understand the complete domain. And for that, they have to go through or go to the domain expert. So there will be someone in your team, which will be a product manager or a domain expert, that will have those features or that responsibility that they will know the domain. All right, they will not be technical people, but they will be the business people. They know how the business works. And I think if you are a developer and you understand also the business works, that is a very, very good combination. That is one of those things that particular developer can be irreplaceable. Like, I mean, it's very, very important for that company. Now, one of the very big misconceptions about unit tests are that unit tests are not allowed to access the database or file system. That's a very big misconception. And if you read Kent Beck book, or if you watch Ian Cooper, the talk that he gave, he also mentioned the same thing, that it's not that unit tests cannot access the database, because they can, or they cannot access the file system because they can if they want to. The main reason people say that don't do those things is when a unit test accesses a database and writes to the database, then it leaves residue, or it leaves some records in the database so that the next test will pass or fail based on that. So shared fixtures problem is going to come over there. Now the solution in those scenarios is obviously when you run your test, make sure that once the test is done, you clean out everything from the database or the file system and make sure that it is in a pristine, clean state or the state when you started. So that's the most important part about unit testing. But if you think that your unit tests are not allowed to access the database, that is a myth, a misconception. All right. Now, your app can be very big. Obviously, if you're working for shopping cart or finance industry or whatever, your main, not every part of your app should get the same priority. So you will again talk to the domain expert or your team, and you're going to find out which portions of your app are responsible for making the money. I mean, maybe there's some logging part that only developers use. Those logging stuff, yeah, it's good for developers, but it may not be directly responsible for making revenue to the company. Now you might just come back and say, okay, well, yeah, because of the log, we were able to find this and that, and cut time short, blah blah blah. It's for developers. It's not for the client. It's not for the customers. So your focus should be on those modules, on that particular code where it is mandatory or which is making you the revenue. All right. So a good example can be if you are working for a credit card company, and when somebody, or a bank account or something, right? A checking account, bank account. I was working for a bank, and somebody spends more money than they have in their bank account or their credit card limit. They just overdraft or something. So you have to basically charge overdraft fees. So you have to make sure that the code that is responsible for charging people when they go over the allocated amount, uh, that code has to work because that is billions of dollar worth, right? I mean, these companies are making billions on fees and late fees and these kind of things. So you have to make sure that that code works. All right. By the way, if you have any question, you can definitely type in the uh, YouTube chat. Test the behavior, not the implementation. Behavior means that what the user expects. You should not be testing stuff like, oh, a certain method is supposed to be called or certain property has to be set, because those things can actually change while the behavior remains the same. So make sure that you are testing the behavior, not the implementation details. And during refactoring, in the red, green, and refactor, make sure that you're not writing any new test because you're not really adding a new behavior. So that's another good point to consider. And end-to-end testing is the best, again, regression. So end-to-end test means that you're testing the real stuff, meaning if you are accessing the database, then you're accessing the real database. And when I say real, I don't mean that you should start doing production stuff or messing around with production data. I mean an actual database hosted for testing purposes, which is a very close clone of the production database. Obviously, it will not have all the records, but let's whatever amount of record, 25% of the records or whatever, but you're actually trying to connect to a real database instead of doing it in memory. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the demo. Now in this demo, and let me go ahead and, there we go. In this demo, we'll be using Swift data, and what I'll be doing is creating a very couple of simple tests that are going to allow us to add a budget and perform different operations. So we don't really care that much about the UI part of it because there is no UI, as you can see. So the first thing, if I want to test and use the principle of test-driven development, the first thing I want to do is to add a test project. Let me go ahead and say editor, add a project or add a target. and just search for test, and you can see that there are two different options, unit testing bundle and UI testing bundle. I'm going to say unit testing bundle, and that's perfectly fine. So what we're trying to do is, let's consider that we're trying to build an application for budgeting, like a personal finance budget. And you are allowed to add a budget. Like you can say, oh, I have a budget for groceries, and I have a budget for my vacation, I have a budget for entertainment. So that's what we're trying to do. All right. So we have to write a couple of different tests. So you can see that my test file is created. I'm just going to remove most of this stuff because I don't really need all of that. So let's remove most of this. Is the font size okay? I think it's pretty big font for me at least. But is the font size okay for you? All of you, you can go ahead and type something in the chat, so I'll know if the font size is good. It should be good. It's pretty big. All right. So the first thing we need to do is we need to allow a person to add a budget. So I'm going to write that test. I'm going to say test budget create. All right. Nice and simple name, test budget create. And we're just going to see that can we even create the budget. Now, keeping in mind that we are actually using, or we will be using, Swift data, because we have to save the budget somewhere, right? And let's just assume that we're going to be saving it to our local database. We're not thinking about iCloud and all that stuff. We're just saying that we're going to be saving it to our local database. I'm not going to be saving to remote server that requires setup and all that, so we're not going to do that for now. We just want to check if the budget is created or not. All right. Now, if you have worked with Swift data, you know that in order to work with Swift data, you need a couple of different things. Like you need to set up the model container. Now, my first iteration of the test, I will try to create the model container right over here. So I'll go ahead and import Swift data. Without the model container, nothing is going to work. That's one of the requirements because I need to access the model context also. So I'm going to say model container for a particular type over here, which will be budget, and for a model configuration. And over here, I can say in memory. But you can see that it's already kind of like failing. It's complaining that, hey, what is this? There is no such thing as budget.self or budget class. There is no such thing as budget. So that's why it's already complaining. It doesn't even compile compile because it knows that there is no such thing as budget. But we just keep working on it. So next, I can go ahead and access the context. There we go. All right. Okay, so I get access to the context. Probably I should mark this with main actor because the context can only be available on the main actor. So that's the first thing I should do. Okay, once we get the context, now we can create the budget. So budget equals to, but you can see that nothing will work because there is no such thing as budget. And I will say limit will be $500. Is $500 a good limit for you, all of you, for the budget, for the groceries? Maybe it's more in your area, but it's a test, right? So whatever you want over here, you can put limit to 500, 200. Well, 200 might be too low, but 1,000 or whatever. But nowadays, 500 is not much. Okay, so we create the budget and we'll say context.insert, and we insert it. You can already see there are so many errors that are just telling us that there's something wrong, right? I mean, there is no budget class. This is completely wrong. It's just telling us all the time, but we just keep typing our code. We know that all of this is not going to work because there is no budget class, but we just keep on it. All right. Now we will retrieve it. Retrieve the budget because we need to make sure that the budget is saved or not. All right. So let me go ahead and try to retrieve it. We will use the fetch descriptor and we will make sure that we are retrieving the budget with its name, which is groceries. We get the budgets, an array of budgets, and we can then go ahead and unwrap that so that we get one budget, all right? And now we can actually check if the name is groceries or not. So let me go ahead and check it over here. There we go. And this is kind of like our test. Now you can say that what about if it returns multiple budgets and all that stuff, but we're just checking the first budget that it returns. I guess if it returns multiple budgets, then we're already in a problem, right? And if the first budget is not groceries, but it has to be because that's what the predicate is actually saying, all right? And then finally, we're just testing out that the name of the budget that you just retrieved from the database or in-memory database is the same as groceries, and the limit is 500. Now, if I run this, it's not going to work. It's going to just give me a lot of issues because it's complaining that there is no budget class. I mean, I'm using this budget class everywhere, but now my test is telling me that there is no budget class, so it's not even going to run. So that's the benefit of test-driven development, although I guess in this scenario, it doesn't really completely reflect all the benefits because I already knew the code that I'm going to type, and it's not really complicated code. So the more complicated code, the more complicated the domain is and the logic is, the more benefit the TDD or test-driven development will be. But in this code, it's mostly a little bit, simple logic. I mean, it's not like something crazy that we're doing. So what should I do? Well, I would probably go back to my actual app and start creating that particular model. So I'll say new group, I'll call it models, and I'll create a new file. This we'll call it budget. Import Swift data. So now we are going to go ahead and create the budget model. All right. And we're going to decorate it with model, var name, var limit. So we're just creating this model. There we go. So we got our model ready. The model is called budget, and it only has name and limit. Limit means that, well, for groceries, you have a $500 limit and so on. Okay, let's go back again to our code. Even though we have added the model in our budget app, we don't really have access to the model inside our test. And the way that you get access to those models is using testable import. Testable import, and then you will import the whole target or the whole module, which is a budget app. So basically, this means that whatever is now inside the budget app, I can access it in my test. And now I can go ahead and use these things. All right. Now I'm using a try exclamation mark over here. I mean, you can cache this error, but if this throws an exception, well, it just throws an exception, and hopefully the test will fail at that point also, right? Let's go ahead and run the test. Now, if I run this test, let's see what happens if you run the test. The first time you're running the test, it might take a little bit of time to run, but in the future, it will be a little bit faster, hopefully. So it's still running the test. It's still waiting for the test to run. All right. You can see over here it's running right there, testing. But don't worry, the first time it's going to be a little bit slower, and hopefully next one it's going to be a little bit faster. We are also using in memory. This means that it's not really going to be writing to the actual database. I actually prefer that it writes to the actual database. I can clean up the records later, but I don't know if there is any difference, if there are any issues that I will face writing to the actual database that I cannot face in memory. I mean, yeah, I can run out of memory and all that, but our tests are not really going to be doing that kind of heavy lifting. So that is taking a long while to run, as you can see. There's nothing going to be here in our simulator, so it's no use pulling the simulator up even. Probably I should get a new machine because this is getting really slow, as you can see. All right, if you have any questions, you can definitely type it out in your chat. All right. Still running. I don't know why it's taking so long. I don't think it usually takes that long. Let me run it again. Shouldn't take that long. Unless I made a mistake and it's getting stuck somewhere. Okay, installing, testing, and the test passed. You can see right there, the test is passing. All right. So the first test that we implemented, we wrote, the test is passing. Unfortunately, this is kind of like a useless test. What did we end up testing? And that's the problem. I mean, when you're testing, you have to be very picky as what test you're writing. This test doesn't make any sense. So what exactly are we testing? Are we testing that we can go ahead and add data to the database, in-memory database using Swift data? I mean, that is pretty much like testing that if I add an item to an array, that item will be added to an array. Well, duh, that's what array is, right? You can add an item to an array. So there's no business logic that we're testing over here. So this test is completely useless. This test is useless. And the bad news is that if you go to companies, and I work for a lot of companies, and we have like thousands of tests, and like 1,800 of them are just useless tests, kind of like these tests. Can I add an item to an array? Can I add in 2 items to an array? Well, yeah, you can add 2 items to an array. How about 3? Yeah, sure. So let's write 3 tests. Each test testing, can you add an item to an array? 3 items to an array, right? So there's no business logic to test in this case. So that test is completely useless. You should not be writing these tests. And I wrote this test just to show you that you shouldn't be writing this test. Any OS IDE version requirement for this? No, this should work for everything. I'm using Xcode 15.2, and I'm also using, or are you talking about the workshop? I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I think for the workshop also, just use Xcode 15.2, and we will be using Swift data, we'll be checking mocking, end-to-end testing, and integration testing. So the actual workshop will cover a lot of stuff, all right? And okay. So what can be a good test to write? Maybe one of our requirements is that users should not be allowed to save 2 budgets with the same name. Maybe we have a requirement like that. How can we do that? Users should not be allowed to save budgets with or same budget with or with the same name, right? And what should we do when they're trying to save a budget with the same name? Well, in this case, we can talk about like this is an actual business logic, and we can work on that. All right. So let's go ahead and say. So what should happen when you're trying to save a budget which already exists? In our case, we will throw an error. So throw duplicate name exception when saving budget with same name twice. Or I don't know if I have to say twice. All right. Now this is a very long name, but I think it's also very descriptive. Test is going to throw a duplicate name exception when saving budget with the same name, when saving budget with the same name multiple times or twice or whatever. All right? You can correct this English and write it in a better wording, but the test is supposed to be throwing an error when you try to insert a budget with the same name twice or more than twice. So that's what we're trying to test. Okay. All right. So how do we test this out? Like, what are we trying to do over here? Well, we need to do a couple of different things. We definitely need the container. So let's go ahead and get that container. There we go. I mean, without the container, without the context, we can't really save the budget to the database, in-memory database. We need to create the budget, right? We need to create the budget. So let's go ahead and create the budget. Here's our budget. We need to save the budget. Context.insert. Okay, there we go. That's going to save the budget. Okay. Well, let's create another budget with the same exact name. The limit can be anything, but we're just going to use a different name and we'll just call it another budget. Now what we are expecting, right? What are we expecting? Well, we're expecting that when you save this budget to the database, an exception of type duplicate name exception should be thrown. So how do we test for that? Well, we can say XCT assert. So these are all built-in things or built-in asserts that are available in XCTest. And the one that I'm going to use is called the XCT assert throws error. And over here we can pass the expression that can throw the error. So if I say over here context.insert, right, insert another budget, okay, we'll get the error. Now, this is kind of weird because this insert doesn't really throw anything, right? I mean, if it was throwing some error, then we should have called it with a try or something like that. But what, okay, let's see. Well, let's see what happens. So we're saying that when I perform context.insert and when I insert another budget, which is the same exact name of the budget, so they're making a duplicate, I'll get an error. And that error, I'll get the error, I'll cast it. I will say error will be of type budget error, which does not exist. And then I will check XCT assert not nil. I will check that if this thrown error is not nil, so some sort of an error is thrown. And I can also go ahead and say assert equal, and I will check that this particular error that was thrown was a very specific type of error, which is called the duplicate name error. All right, and I can say thrown error. Now this is not even going to compile because there is no such thing as budget error. So already this is failing. So test is telling us that, well, this is not going to work because there is no such thing as budget error. Well, that's not a big deal. We can always go back to our budget and or some other custom error class, and we can create budget error. And we can go ahead and say over here, duplicate name. All right. So we just create this error. You can create this error in your own file, and that should be okay. I mean, in a different file. Let's go back now. Let's go ahead and build it. The first thing is that if the build succeeds or not. Okay, the build is successful now because now the budget error is recognized because we just created it. So it's fine now. Let's go ahead and run this also. Hopefully it's going to run a little bit faster this time because I already ran the test and the test is failing. If you see why the test is failing, it's actually telling you that the test was expecting that the error will be thrown, but the error was not thrown. So that is the reason that the test is failing. All right. So something that we are trying to do over here is that when you try to add another budget, it should throw an error, but it's not throwing an error. So something is wrong. And this is the business logic. This is the domain logic that we need to test. Like what exactly is going on and how can we make this test pass? So what do you think we should do? Any ideas in the YouTube chat? how can we make sure that we conform to this requirement that when you are trying to add another budget with the same name, it should throw an error, because it's right now it's failing, it's not throwing an error, and that's the requirement, that it should not allow us to insert duplicate things. All right. So let's see how we can solve this problem. Now, the way that you solve this problem is a little bit different, all right? Because now we have kind of like a precondition on our save that when you are saving the budget with the same name, it should throw an error. So let me go back to my budget. And the way that we will do that is by exposing the save function, or just creating a save function in our budget. So I'll say context. I mean, I guess we can pass in context, which is the model context. There we go. And this can throw an error. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a custom function inside my budget where you have to pass in the model context, because with the model context, you will be able to save it. And over here, we can say that if the budget is already inserted, already present, then throw error. Else insert budget. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Because I'm looking at some loading, something going on. I don't know if it's even in the correct place. Go ahead and write something in the chat if you can see my screen correctly. We are in the budget class right now, and we are trying to implement the save function, because I don't know why it's showing something different on my preview. So I'm not really sure what you're looking at right now. If you can hear me, you can type something in the YouTube chat just to let me know that you are seeing the budget budget file, the budget model. All right. Okay, kind of hard to tell. Nobody's typing anything over there. Okay. All right, so I'll continue. Okay, you can see it clearly. Okay, good. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to check if the budget is already inserted. How do I check that? Well, we can create a private function which is called if the budget exists or not, where you're going to be passing in the name of the budget and you're going to be returning Boolean. The private function means that you don't have to test this function on its own. It will automatically be tested through the use of public function. So that's another very important thing with testing. You don't test private functions on their own because you can't really access them. You test them through the use of things that are available, the exports. They're called the exports, right? The surface area. So the budget surface area is name, limit, init function, save. So this is how you will access the budget. So we don't really want to test individually the budget exists because it will be tested through the use of save function. So how do we implement the budget exist? Well, let's go over here. Budget exist is going to be like a simple function, and I'm going to just go ahead and add some code to it. There we go. All right. And I guess we'd also need the context, right? So we're going to just pass in the context, model context. There we go. So over here in the budget exist, we use the fetch descriptor to get the budget. We executed the statement and it gets all the budgets. And then we are simply saying that if it's not empty and budget count is 1, then it's fine. I don't know if you even need the budget count 1, but I'm just adding it over there. Um, I guess if it has some existing data, then you're already in trouble. So you may not even need the budget count 1. All right. And now we have that function, so we should be able to just go and use it in our save function. So let's go ahead and use that. If budget exists, passing in the name, which is just the name, and the context, which is the context. So if the budget exists, then, well, we have a problem. We're going to go ahead and throw an error. And else, we can go ahead and insert something. Insert self, which already is a budget. All right. So this means that now whenever you want to insert a new budget or save a new budget, you will have to use the save function. So instead of using context.insert, you will end up using save function. Over here, you can also use insert function if you want to, right? So you'll have to be a little bit careful over here that sometimes you can also use a context, but I can go ahead and say over here budget.save and pass in the context. Let's go ahead and build it. And let's go ahead and test it out. If I go ahead and run this right now, we'll have to see that if it throws exception or not, and you can see it is throwing an exception. This means that if you try to insert two budgets with the same name, now it is throwing an exception. So that's good. Our test is actually passing in this case. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that we don't allow two budgets with the same name. Question is, you wrote the method before returning the test. Wrote the method before returning the test? I don't know what that means. How wrote the method before running the test? Well, the method is over here, I guess. I mean, the save function, if that's what you're asking. Okay. Okay, so this test looks like it's passing. Well, we did run the test. If that's your question, no, we did run the test. I think maybe you missed that part, but we ran the test, and the test was failing. So that's why we had to go and write the test, or write the code. So initially, if you remember, this code was not there, right? I mean, this code was something else, like context.insert. So I had to go and write the method to make it pass. Okay. So the next test that we can do is, how can we make sure that our test is calculating the budget expense total? Like whenever you are having a grocery or you're buying groceries, grocery is just a category, right? You will be adding some actual groceries like bread, milk, butter, cookies, things like that. So what we want to do is, are those expenses like milk and bread and all these, are they adding up to be the correct thing or not? All right. And each expense can also have a quantity. Like I can buy 2 breads, I can buy 3 cookies, and I can buy 4 something else. So let's go ahead and write a test for that. So we'll start with a test, and let's see, we have a test calculate budget expenses total, and I will say main actor because we will need to access the container. So I'll get the container again, and that's the refactoring part. You can already see that I'm just copying the container again and again. Maybe that has to be defined somewhere else because I already copied it like 3 times. So that might be a hint that something needs to be done with this container and the context because I'm already copying it again and again. Okay? Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is obviously to save a particular budget. So I'm saving the budget, I'll say throws over here. And I think we do have access to the context. I think we added a label for the context. There we go. So we're writing the test, and in the test, I also need to create expenses. An expense can have a name, an expense can have a price, and an expense can have quantity. So you can see I have expense, it has a name, price, and a quantity. Name, price, and a quantity. This is not going to work because there is no such thing as expense. I mean, we need to create that eventually. Next, I'm going to go ahead and assign expenses to that particular budget. And then finally, I can go ahead and check that if the calculation, the one that I spent, the money that I've spent on expenses is equal to $59. So how is it $59? Well, the price is $4.50, right? So $4.50 multiplied by 2 because the quantity is 2, and then 5 multiplied by 10 because the quantity is 10. And if you add them all together, it's going to be 59. All right? But you can use a different amount, obviously, this is just for an example. If I run this, it's not going to work. There is no such thing as expenses. There is no property called expenses on the budget. Everything is going to fail. This means the test is telling us that, oh, go ahead and add an expense. So I'm going to go and add a new expense model, which will be a Swift data model. I'll say expense. And just to speed things up, I'm just going to go ahead and copy it, the one that I already have. You can see nothing really crazy going on in the expense. It's a model. It has a name, it has a price, it has a quantity, and just a simple initializer. But there is no relationship between the expense and the budget. So probably we should add that relationship, like budget. There we go. And also for the budget, doesn't really have a relationship with the expense. So we should add that relationship using the relationship macro. There we go, relationship macro. We added that relationship. But still, our test is not going to pass or even run because we don't really have a spent property. So let's go to the budget and add a spent property. Now you can add this anywhere you want. I'm going to say spent double, and just so that we can make the test happy, I'm going to just return 1 from spent. And now obviously this is going to fail because 1 is a constant value that we are returning, and in the test we are testing against 59. Those things are not equal, but just for fun, just see that if the test passes or fails. Okay, so the test is obviously going to fail. No point in running it because 59 is not equal to 1, and this test is also, this is kind of like telling you the same thing. All right, so we need to fix the spent, right? We need to fix that how the spent is being calculated. So let's go back to the budget, and we need to write this in a different way. All right. So spent. Now this is actually one of those things where I also made the mistake. I was recording a video, or I was, I think, recording a course, and I didn't really write the test for this purpose, and I just did a wrong calculation. And then later on, I wrote some tests and find out that, okay, that was a problem. I mean, it was a really stupid mistake, but testing would have helped at that point because it is with, you know, some sort of a logic goes over here, or some sort of a little bit of a calculation goes over here. Okay, so we'll have the result plus we're using the reduce operator so that we can reduce, and we can just, you know, kind of like gather everything and add them together. And the one that I was doing, it was kind of like this, expense.price, right? So you can already see that this is not right because I'm not taking into account the quantity. So let's go ahead and also do the quantity part of it. So expense.quantity, and it's automatically going to be returned because I guess that's, you know, the first, there's only one line in there. So let's go to build it. Let's go ahead and now run our test. And now when we run our test, the spent is calculated correctly. All right, so you can see that now this is working perfectly fine. And the final test that we want to write would be the remaining. All right, so I'm just going to copy it. We can go over it. We're kind of like running out of time. The remaining amount, I mean, if you have spent this much, what will be the remaining amount? So if I have $500 over here, context, again, we need to copy the context stuff again and again. So that's a refactoring step that you need to take. There is no remaining property. I mean, we need to calculate the remaining, right? Remaining means how much money is left in your budget after you have done all of your expenses. So let's go to the budget. We'll say remaining budget, oh, not budget, remaining double. And what is remaining? Well, the budget dot limit minus spent. Okay. Well, not even budget or limit. I guess the limit subtracting the spent, and that will be the remaining part that you have left. And now we can go back and run our final test also. And there we go. Everything is passing. It's always a good idea to run all of your tests together, you know. So let's go ahead and run all of them and making sure that all of them are passing. Because sometimes what happens is that we create these contexts, we create these containers as kind of like a closure, which I've done. I made the mistake, and the closure only initializes it once, and then it reuses those container and context, or the container itself, and that container already has some records in it. So the test is kind of like messing around with other tests. All right, so it's always a good idea to make sure that you run these tests individually, but as a whole also, so that you can see the result. And these tests should be very fast because, you know, they're in memory, so they are really fast. They're testing the logic portions of it. So that is pretty much it. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. Once again, this is just a very small part of my, you know, that's a very small part, let's see where we are, of the actual lecture. If you want to learn more about testing, or if you want to check out my courses, then you can always go to azamsharp.school and check out, I have a testing course somewhere over here. You can see, let's see where it is. There we go. I think I have a testing course right there. I will give you the link, copy link address. There we go. And I have some workshops coming up. The second workshop that I'm hosting, or for the testing, is on April 27th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So this is kind of like a part of the workshop about unit testing right there. But we will also be learning about mocking, integration testing, and also end-to-end testing. This is only the price that's going to be for this workshop. You can see that for future workshop, the prices are different, you know, and I'm also planning to do a Swift UI architecture workshop. So prices for that will be very different from any other workshop. All right. So that is pretty much it. Is there any questions I can answer? And hopefully you have enjoyed this workshop. I try to make it fun and kind of like practical. But if you do have any questions, you can type in your YouTube chat, and I'll be more than happy to take a look at it. And by the way, you can follow me on Twitter. So if you are on Twitter, my Twitter handle is at Azam Sharp. And let's see. All right, any questions that I can answer before we kind of like wrap up? We are pretty much close to the 1 hour mark. Any questions I can answer?